So today I'm teaching you how to paint this beach seascape. So stay tuned, I'll let you know what to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and spray down my pan and just also a little bit of water to reactivate my paint. I have my paper here today. I've got some water. The brushes I'm using would be, I've got this flat wash brush for most of the things we'll be doing. And then I have this number 8 round. And then I have a liner brush just in case we want to do some fine details. So I have taped off my paper, as you can see, and the sketch here, just to go over it again, make it a little bit darker. I've got the ocean here with the lovely waves crashing on the shore. So I've got this double line, so I can show that. This is all going to be in white gouache. And then I've got, just some little squiggly lines just to show where the rocks can go. As we get farther out, we're not going to have as many details because it's in the distance. And then finally our tree line, I've just got these little trees here kind of getting smaller as we go out towards the distance that way. And then some trees coming over here. So that's it. Let's go ahead and start getting into it. So for our sky today, I'm going to dip in my water. I'm just going to grab some blue. I have some of this really bright blue. I do have blue here. And so we're going to use this today. Now you can make it very watery, like watercolor if you wanted to. And then it's just going to go on in a very different way than if you were to make it very juicy with paint. And I think I'm going to add a little bit more water to this. So as I'm starting out with these layers, and you could even do a bigger brush if you wanted to. I just grabbed the one that I'll be using for a lot of the line details. And we're just going to go a little bit thinner here towards the bottom, just kind of a graded wash so that we have really, really dark on the top and then very light on the bottom. And we're just going to blend this in. And I can even take some of this, this lighter blue color and just like drop in just a little bit of color here and there if I wanted to. If you want to, you can do that as well. And then just clean your brush. I do have a paper towel here with me, so I can do some blotting, and then I can just blend some of this color in. And it looks really beautiful like it is watercolor, but we're using gouache. This is not an acrylic gouache. That is different than a watercolor-based gouache. And so we have that happening. I think I want to start doing the ocean too. And we're going to do a sand color over here. Why do I have a tray? I'm just going to do kind of that same color and start bringing it down. Why do I have a tray that has old paint on it? And we're just going to go back and forth, just kind of adding in these colors. And I'm going pretty watery with this paint, as you can see, which you can do with this gouache. If it's acrylic paint, acrylic gouache, you cannot add water to that and get this watercolor effect. That won't work out. And we can go back in with some thicker gouache later and add in some thicker paint over this with some details and all those things. So yeah, the question being, why am I using this old tray? Well, because you can reactivate gouache and keep using it just like you can with watercolor. There's no problem in that. There's no shame in that. I'm actually going to dip into my lovely gouache paint and I'm going to make my horizon line. It might bleed into my sky, but that's okay. We're going to go with it a little bit here, and they're just going to draw it out, a little bit of those ocean waves. I might even dip into this a little bit and add some of that too, just for some lovely texture. And as it's wet, we're doing this wet on wet technique with gouache. How fun. So gouache, might feel a little complicated just because it's new. If it's new for you and you're doing this bonus tutorial, well, congratulations. It's just fun to learn new mediums and see how you can play with color and texture and all the things. So we're just kind of getting that going here, and we're gonna let that dry a little bit. Of course, I'm gonna still mess around with it just a little bit. And we do have white, which is great. Unlike watercolor, we have this lovely white color that we can do a lot with. I'm actually going to take this number 8 brush, and I'm going to use it to scoop white so that I can lighten up some of my colors as I need them. So yes, you can reactivate and use the color that you have. So over here, I've got some browns, some tans, some reddish color here. I want to start doing my sand area, my beachy area here. And what I'd like to utilize right now is just a little bit of this orangey yellow color. I'm just gonna add that in. It's so bright. And I can add in a little bit of this reddish brown. And then let's add in, let's see, let's add in a little bit of red as well. We're just doing some crazy colors now. I know that, I know. And then the opposite of red is green, so we can add some green as well. I'm just trying to maybe make some different shades. We've got that brownish color again. And so red and green, opposite on the color wheel. So you're gonna get a really rich brown color there. I wanna add in some white and kind of see what we get from that as well, just over here. And you've got this really light shade. And so we can do several different colors of this. We're doing like a little sand color, but it can have various colors within that, within the sand. All right, so I'm gonna start with this lighter color, and I'm just gonna go over where the trees are gonna be, all that stuff. Just making these horizontal brush strokes, being aware of the boundary we put in for where our white fluffy waves are gonna go, and just adding that. I love using a flat wash brush like this, and it just creates really nice lines. If I use a round brush, it's gonna look a lot different, the marks that I make. And I feel with landscapes, it ends up creating that texture that I do love. Also remembering to use a larger brush, you know, I've heard it said for as long as you can. I'm just dropping in some of that brown now, just creating a little bit of dimension with this texture. And if you can use it as long as possible, that will help you to just paint more loosely. The smaller the brush, the more detailed you want to try to be. And sometimes that can take away the beauty or the spontaneity of a painting if you're just trying to get in all these really exact small marks. And so bigger brush to start out with can be good. Just a little bit of red here. And we're gonna do some stones later too. We're gonna do some trees. So I just wanted to put some initial marks down, and then we can allow that to dry and continue to add in the other pieces of our painting. So I think though this is pretty good. We can start with our greens. I'm just flipping my palette around just so you guys can see the various areas. So we have a lovely light yellowy green here, kind of a bluish green, and then more of a sappy green over here. And we can start to layer some of those. With gouache, you tend to want to go darker first and then start adding your lighter marks. You don't have to do it that way, but unlike watercolor, you're allowed to do light or dark or whatever and just kind of go back and forth between those. So this color is a really bluish green color. I'm gonna take this reddish, this orangey red color and add a little bit and just see what happens when we put that together. Add a little bit more of this here. Sometimes with color mixing, you're just experimenting to see what kind of color you can get out of something. So it's more of a bluish color. We can even add a little bit more brown to change that up a little bit. We could add in some black too. But I want a really dark green for those shadowy parts of the trees. And I'm taking the same brush and we're just gonna start adding in, kind of stippling in some tree lines. And we will be able to add in over the top of that some of our trunks and all this stuff when we are ready. We can add in our highlights for our trees, some lighter green colors as well, and just make it really pop and look more three-dimensional. But we'll start with our darks today. You could start with lights if you wanted to. I find that, you know, with acrylic and with gouache, just starting with the dark for me worked best. But it's up to you, it's your painting, and you can kind of figure that out as you go. So I'm just twisting and turning the brush, just making these little marks. Nothing is really, you know, too thought out, just making marks on your paper, getting smaller as we get out there into the water line. Okay, and a little bit more. I'm gonna bring these down a little bit more. We're gonna have some trees down here too, so I wanna bring some marks down there. We're using that little corner of the brush upright, but then also this way, and it's just adding in some different markings. If you want to use a round brush for these too, that would be completely fine and appropriate. It might be even easier for making your trees. You have a really nice point on your round brushes, and that might be better for your style. So go ahead, use what you have and what you want to use. I don't want all these to look the same, so I might make some marks kind of poke out a little bit more than others, and just have such a good time with this. This is a lovely little ocean scene. We're gonna make sure that we enjoy the experience. Okay, so this is kind of a medium-ish brown right now, or sorry, green color. I'm adding in a little more of the green. As you can see, my colors on the palette are quite bright. They're very bright, so a lot of these require mixing. And if I want to lighten it up, I'm going to actually add in some of the sappy green here. If I want to change it up, then I can just add some white if I want to make it lighter, and boom, there you go. Instantly lighter. So I'm going to pretend that the light is coming from this side. And so I'm going to do some of this lighter here on the trees. Just adding that in. Again, my paint is still kind of watery, so you can add more pigment if you want to, but we can definitely make it thicker later on. Now, having that water in there is going to make it easier, you know, obviously to mix it and to move that paint around. So, and if you're used to painting with watercolor, it's going to make more sense, you know, to have it be more of a watery mix. But, you know, try to see if you can, I'm going to get some white. Try to see if you can kind of stretch your ability to paint with a little bit less water. We could add a little bit of yellow in here, maybe this cadmium yellow. And keep in mind that the different, you know, if you want to use green on here, you can, or you can mix up your own. Yellow plus blue is green, so we could sort of make up our own here too. A little bit of blue in there. And we've got kind of a grayish color happening. Let's do some lemon yellow. And a lot of this is about experimenting to see, oh, see, that looks really nice. And we've got a nice light color. I'm gonna add more paint to this, so we're not having such a watery mix. Take a little bit of blue. And if you're wanting to paint a large area, a nice little tip is to make sure that you try to mix up enough paint. Otherwise, sometimes you have a hard time matching that paint again when you do that later. And you're trying to, okay, I did this color, this type of green for the highlight, but then I need it for 5 more trees. And you're trying to desperately mix up that same green. And it can be kind of challenging to get that right. And so if you mix up enough and you have a little left over, you can reconstitute it and use it again, you know, if you want, like I'm doing here. So we have that going on. And this green here is not a terrible green, but it's really, really bright. And we want to tone it just a little bit. I've got a little bit more of that green on here. And then we can just take a little bit of our red, just a tiny bit, and put that in there, just to kind of have this medium green color. And we're gonna wait till this is dry before we add that in, but I wanna start doing some rocks. So we're going to want to do kind of light, medium, and dark for our rocks. I've got some gray here already, and maybe add some, yeah, let's just make it dark. Add some black to that, make it really, really dark for our shadowed parts of our rocks. And then we have this reddish color, which I absolutely love, reddish brown. It's a bit intense, but it does look really, really pretty. We have that, and we have our dark, and then we can kind of do, we have some of these other random ones on the palette, a really light, kind of tan color over here that we can use for a little bit of a shadow. But let's go ahead and use some more of this. I'm just gonna thicken it up a little bit. And I've got that same brush. I kind of have an idea here of where I wanted the rocks to be. So I'm just gonna start adding those in. Just random little shapes that we will add different colors to. So if these are our rocks here, I love this brush for this reason. Just organic, kind of geometric shapes with harsh lines versus rounded lines that you would get with a round brush. And I just think that they look really pretty. as stones, and I like the texture that you can get out of that as well. So we'll let that sit there for a second. I'm just gonna hop around to things because I'd like to let things dry a little bit and then go back to others as we can. So we're gonna go back to our blue, and I'm going to darken up that horizon line again. So I've got my dark blue here. Pretty thick paint this time. So adding in that really dark horizon, you know it's always gonna be pretty dark, this water line here. And I'm going to clean my brush and just start, I don't want it to be so harsh, but I want it to look pretty dark because it's farther away. And then we're just gonna start adding in a few more of those lines. This is really thick paint compared to what we used before. We can add in some white lines also for that really, the frothiness of the ocean, for lack of a better word, the bubbles that come up when the waves are crashing. It's unremarkable. And we definitely have to capture that in our painting. Let's see, just a little bit more of that. And then maybe blending this in here, just a little bit. Doing water can be really, really hard. It can be very challenging. It's not an easy task. It's not an impossible task either, but like I said, love using a brush like this that can just create some beautiful brush marks and create the idea of water here, okay? All right, so we'll just let that kind of chill, and then we could even add in some white if we're ready for that. I'm gonna start adding in some of the darker parts, a little bit of the shadowy parts here underneath the rocks. And just create those little marks, just tiny little ones. I'm using that corner of my brush, I'm being pretty conservative about it, not trying to add a whole bunch, but just by using that little edge of this brush, I'm able to get really nice thin marks that aren't really going to be too crazy or intense. I just want to have the darker under those rocks to emulate the shadows. If it's a bright sunny day, you know, you're going to have a lot of those little shadow bits, and we want to show that, as well as having some lighter ones on the top. So we'll kind of do that. I even like to have some of those dark marks just randomly around too. Some maybe darker stones, maybe there's some right here, you know, by the water's edge. Often, you know, when the waves are pushing stones back and forth, and we just want to add a little bit of that over there. Okay, so we'll leave that alone, let that dry, and we just keep going back and forth to different aspects, to different areas. We're gonna go back to our green, and I think I want to add just a little bit of brown to that, and we're gonna see how much. I think that looks good. It's just kind of a weird brownish green. Let me just add in some of that for my trees. I have a lot of white space, and I did that on purpose because I like to leave a lot of the white paper as I'm adding my layers so that I can decide in the moment the shape of the trees that I want to go with. And sometimes I'll just add in like that first painting just has a whole bunch of, you know, that same color, and then we add our layers. But sometimes I like to do it a little more individually, if that makes sense. And so just kind of filling that in now, and there's a whole bunch of colors happening. So we'll go in, we'll do some tree trunks. We can do some more, you know, light or some shadows as well. But I'm gonna start painting a little bit down here at the tree line, a little bit here as well. And we'll differentiate things a little bit more, especially when we have those trunks, and that's gonna help us out. So now I'm going to start doing a little bit more with some gouache, with some white gouache. That's what I was thinking. So I've been painting using white gouache in my watercolor paintings for a while. And so I'm used to just having that little tub of gouache on the side to do things. But here we've got everything is gouache. And so we have the privilege to be able to do all kinds of fun layers with all of these beautiful gouache colors. Now, if you're not really into mixing, you might want to get a mix or a set that has more colors that aren't just so bright. if you're painting nature, I should say. Mixing is important to learn. You know, there's still so much that I learn every day when I'm mixing colors together. If you're working with a new palette, you're just gonna have to learn a whole new way to do it. And by swatching out your paints and seeing exactly what you have to work with. But it's good for the brain. All the things that we're doing when we're doing art is good for the brain. It's good for any type of frustrations or trauma that we have going on, being able to have that little break where our brain can just pause from all the yuck and we can focus on making something beautiful. And even if it doesn't turn out in the way that we wanted or it doesn't look as beautiful as we had hoped or imagined, it's okay. It's practice. I always say that we're getting better every time we practice. And if we can keep our minds in that aspect, we can appreciate, you know, whatever results we end up getting. And so if you find yourself being frustrated at this in this painting or other paintings, remind yourself that's okay and it's normal, and you're practicing and you're getting better. We're all getting better as we work on this. Okay, so I want to take my little liner brush here. If you don't have a liner, just use what you have, something that's thin that can make some nice thin marks. And I just wanted to do a little bit more of these like squiggly lines here, emulating just some bubbliness in the ocean with the waves. Okay, you can do it on top of the dark parts if you wanted to, whatever makes sense to you. Just a few little marks. If you feel like you have too much white space in some of these areas, you know, you can even dry brush as well, but if you feel like you have too much white space, you can always fill it in with some more color. Going back in and doing some more blues, you know, that's totally fine. We're not done until we're done, right? And I'm even gonna take some of this dark blue paint here, mix it up. It's pretty watery because there's just a lot of water on my brush, and that's okay. And just gonna add a little bit more of this in to some of these areas here. We have a lot of colors, we have a lot of brush strokes and brush marks going on. If you don't like that, you can just take a clean brush that's damp, that you've dabbed on a paper towel, and you can start to blend in some of those marks so you don't feel like there's so many marks on your page. Some people like that blended look, and some people like the painterly look where they can see every little mark and they just leave it like that. And that's just it's a style preference. We're going to switch again, and we're gonna go over to our tannish side. I just wanted to have the chance to do a little bit of a highlight on some of these stones. Just a little bit of a difference in how it looks. So we've got really red stones, and if we add just a few little highlights of this color, it's just gonna give it a little bit more dimension. So we can even do a little bit of that on the ground. Can even do some brush strokes in between everything. I'm loving the brush strokes. I like to see them. I feel like it helps me to have a lot more interest in a painting, or to create more interest in a painting. So for me personally, I don't mind those brush strokes at all. All right, I've got my lovely red, orangey brown paint over here, and I want to add a little bit of black to that on the corner. I'm going to do my tree trunks, and we're going to do that warm reddish brown color. It's just too intense right off the palette, and so we're making this lovely chocolate brown. I've got my liner once again, and I'm going to start adding in my tree trunks and my branches, and it's going to all of a sudden create this tree with some life in it. And these are going to start looking like trees, definitely. So, you know, just be very quick about it. You don't have to be too exact. This is not rocket science, guys, and I'm hoping that you're having a lot of fun. And if you're wanting to paint with gouache, you know, we're going to be doing more of these tutorials. And it's just a beautiful medium that, you know, it's worth learning. It's a different style than watercolor, but it's also beautiful, and it has versatility, and it's forgiving because you mess up, and it's okay. You can just go back and repaint, paint over it, and it's fine. with watercolor, it gets pretty upset pretty quickly and sometimes will not forgive you. The paper will fall apart or peel, especially if it's not a very sturdy or honestly expensive paper, because the more expensive the paper, you know, the better it tends to hold up to all the water, right? Just wanted to give you a little close up here. So just doing some branches and, you know, some trunks here that are covered up by trees, and some of them are, you can see the branches extending out. So we're just gonna add a few more of those details in, just creating a really beautiful tree forest here. And if you don't like how some of those branches go, just paint over it. All right, I hope you're having fun. I hope you can check in with yourself, as I always say, and just see, am I having a good time, or am I feeling frustrated or anxious about something, whether it's my art or something else. If you're thinking about your stressors, try to bring yourself back to the reality of what's going on, which is painting, and hopefully enjoying that process. If you're feeling frustrated about your painting and not sure if you like how it's turning out, let's do some like random branches and lines here. If it's because of the painting, just remind yourself this is supposed to be fun, it's practice, and it doesn't matter the end result. The only thing that really does matter here is that you can enjoy yourself and have a reprieve from your stressors. There's so much in that narrative in our head that causes us, well, quite honestly, it causes us a lot of harm. And being able to, you know, get control back from those narratives and let ourselves know that, you know, the story in our head that's the worst case scenario is not typically reality, and that we can remind ourselves what is really true. Okay, I'm gonna do a little bit of shadows here on the trees just underneath, and I'm gonna grab this really cool green color, pretty watery, a little brown, just a really watery mix of this. We're not gonna go intense. All right, just really light shadow here underneath our trees. It's gonna be a lot of darker space. There's so many trees, so don't worry too much about it. Just adding in where it seems to make sense for you along the beach line here. And I think I do want to add a little bit darker green too. So like we did before, we took a teal color, we're adding in some of that darker. You can add in some gray, you can add in some brown, just for a little bit more shadowed side right here. And I'm just going to add that in on some of these trees. And yeah, we have a lot of branches, so you can work on covering that up too if you want, just a little bit. That's not a problem. You know, you don't usually see a ton of branches, at least in paintings and in real life. You know, a lot of times from a distance, you're just seeing that foliage. So maybe you can leave them if you want to. Obviously, if tis the season, you know, we're losing branches or we're losing leaves and all the things with our trees, so they might be more bare. But this is clearly not fall or winter. Our trees are pretty green, doing pretty good. All right. Although depending on where you are, what beach you're at, you might have more greenery or less. All right, so this is coming together nicely. I did change my water because my water is getting really, really muddy. One thing I'd like to do is go over the white and just add a little bit more of white so we can make it a little more pronounced, and then we'll see. We are almost there. So if you add water to your white, sometimes you need to add a little bit of water to make it more spreadable, but then it's gonna make it more transparent. So that's something to keep in mind when you're working with this beautiful, this gorgeous white paint color. I just wanted to do another little layer there of that color. So I think this is coming together pretty well. If you wanted to, you could add a little bit more to your sand, to your ground, or to your trees if you want. I think that for me, just a little bit more here on the ocean, right here, just a little bit more. I just wanted it to be a little darker. So, and really the only thing left here now is to take off the tape and see the big reveal for our painting. So this is always one of my favorite things to do. I have my paper taped down to the table since it isn't on a block and it's just loosey-goosey. So I can take that off right now. And we can remove that and it'll be a little bit easier moving things around. So I like to pull at an angle, especially if you're feeling like the tape is starting to peel some of the paper, which can tend to happen. And so if you don't want that to happen, what you can do is hit it up with a hair dryer, which will heat up that adhesive, and that'll help you as well. Sometimes a cheaper paper can also, the tape can pull that paper as well. So you can experiment with different tapes and papers to see what works, but definitely heating it up first is going to be helpful for you. I hope you enjoyed doing this gouache tutorial with me. You're on a journey of discovery with me as I am learning gouache little by little, like trying to add more gouache skills to the things that I have learned. And so I hope you enjoyed this today. Let me know in the comments what you thought and if you have any questions, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care.